Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. It would be difficult to locate New Yorkers who don't know about CUNY. It is part of the fabric of our city, educating generations of New Yorkers, including those first in their families to go to college. As the nation's largest urban university, CUNY holds a special place, not only here in New York, where it has transformed the lives of so many, but also throughout the nation, where it serves as an exemplar of providing higher education to those often disenfranchised. A new book, CUNY's First 50 Years, Triumphs and Ordeals of a People's University, tells the story of CUNY from its inception in 1961 through the forces and events shaping the university we see today. Its authors, Anthony Picciano and Chet Jordan, join me for what they describe as a character sketch of a great university. Coming up now on EdCast. My guests today are Anthony Picciano and Chet Jordan. A longtime member of the CUNY family, Anthony Picciano is a professor and executive officer of the PhD program in urban education at the CUNY Graduate Center. He is also a professor of education leadership at Hunter College, where he was a student himself in 1965. Chet Jordan is a full-time instructor at CUNY's Gutman Community College and a doctoral student on the Community College Experience at the CUNY Graduate Center. Welcome to EdCast, and thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
You're very welcome. This is your book, CUNY's First 50 Years, Triumphs and Ordeals of a People's University. I found it a really interesting read as a member of the CUNY family myself. So I wanted to ask you to begin with, what were some of your connections to CUNY and what prompted the beginning of the book?
Okay. Well, you were very gracious in indicating that I had a long-time association with CUNY since 1965. So that's like 52 years.
I hope that was gracious.
It was very gracious, and I'm very proud of that. But it's part of the reason why the book evolved. In 2011, which was the 50th anniversary of CUNY as a university, myself and a colleague at the Graduate Center, Steve Breyer, we did a seminar on 50 years of CUNY. And both of us developed some material, and I subsequently taught 2 more seminars with former Chancellor Matt Goldstein on higher education. And I would use CUNY as an example. So I amassed a lot of material. And I was looking at this, and I said, gee, there's a book here. But I wanted also to use it as a way to maybe inspire some people, particularly our doctoral students, to do research on CUNY, which is very little done, very little done. And a couple of years ago, this young doctoral student, who was also happened to be a faculty member at Gutman, my colleague Chet Jordan, entered our program, and he expressed a lot of interest in CUNY, doing research in higher education. He's doing very important work, particularly, I would say, in the post-2000 period. And so I invited him to write this book with me.
Now, when you write a book like this, obviously certain things emerge when you begin to tell your story, and you do say that there is a sort of overarching theme that kind of emanates out of the work that you've done. What would you say is the theme of the first 50 years of CUNY?
So first of all, thanks for having us here.
Sure,
this is really exciting for both of us.
Pleasure.
And thanks for the introduction, Tony. My experience kind of comes at a later point, more contemporary point than yours and Tony's. So I began in CUNY in 2011. So one of the themes, I think, that I've been contending with as a young faculty member, also as a doctoral student who's trying to kind of dive into the research around CUNY, is this issue of access that has come up across the generations at our university. And I think in our book, access comes up as a theme in each of the chapters in a very different way. So at times, the university has seen access as a way to kind of open the door wide open to the masses with this really rich mission of educating the whole people of the city of New York.
The first thing I want to clarify, though, is the creation of the university itself. Since many people are confused when I say say the university began in 1961, because they all know that City College was around and Hunter much longer than that. So tell us a little bit about the creation of the university. What was there before? What happened in 61? How did that change?
Okay. So you're right. The university, as a university, only starts in 1961. City College goes back to 1847. Hunter College goes back to 1870. Really wonderful institutions, really the only vehicles for opportunity for students or people of means to get a higher education in New York City. There's some expansion. Brooklyn College, Brooklyn College and Queens College evolve in the 1930s, and 3 community colleges, Staten Island, Queensborough, and Bronx Community College, evolve in the 1950s. That's the university at that time, but they're not a university per se. There's not a real integration. There's a Board of Higher Education, but there's no administrative arm really of the Board of Higher Education. So they were separate. They submitted separate budgets to the city, and they were really like independent. It was more than just a loose confederation. There was a lot of individual and autonomous.
And then what changed in terms of the structure in 61? What changes
in the 1950s? There's several things. There's major changes going on in New York City. The economy is changing. We're moving from manufacturing to service. There's also a sense that in the late 60s and early 70s, there's going to be this enormous baby boom population coming to the colleges, not just CUNY, but all over the country. And that's right, us. And,
us, right.
and the fact is that there was not this plan for how City University or the colleges that made up what was, quote unquote, City University or the Board of Higher Education at the time, were going to deal with it. But I think the real push for it comes with the election of Governor Nelson Rockefeller in 1959. He ran on various themes, but one of them was to develop a first-class higher education system in New York State. Upon election in 1959, he almost immediately establishes what's known as the Held Commission, headed by Henry Held, who was the president of the Ford Foundation. And the Held Commission does this study of higher education and makes the recommendation that there needs to be a significant expansion. And Governor Rockefeller can control the SUNY system, or what would become the SUNY system. He could not control the CUNY system. He would have to go through the Board of Regents to do anything with the CUNY system. CUNY sees this, and basically or the city sees this, and they basically see that they must have some kind of plan. And so they develop what they call the City University of New York, 1961.
And that's the university that we are speaking of today, and that's the one that we all know about. So,
but the original 7 colleges, which existed before, they are the first colleges there.
And I know you do point out in the book that over the 10 years since that creation, the university expands tremendously with the addition of college.
It doubles in enrollments, it doubles in the number of colleges. What were formerly parts of City College, like John Jay and Baruch, become autonomous colleges. Even here, where we're sitting now, Lehman College was Hunter College in the Bronx.
Right. So let's go to some of those significant events, and Chet was already alluding to open admissions and remediation as a pivotal player. You begin your book, I remember, with a nice anecdote about Hunter College, first day of school kind of thing, about when the university was the kind of university, I guess, that I remembered when I entered, and all you tried very hard to get into City College, and you worried very much if you were going to be accepted, and you worried about your SAT scores and your GPAs. And then, lo and behold, comes open admissions, and a real change in attitude and tenor about who the university should serve and what it should be. And I was an undergraduate at that time, and I have to say that it was very tumultuous, kind of scary, and you were as well. So tell us a little bit about open admissions and what prompts it and what happens during that time.
So there's a whole backdrop that I think a lot of people are quite unfamiliar with that leads up to the open admissions decision kind of from 1969 into 1970. So the 3 or 4 years leading up to that decision that was ultimately made by the Board of Higher Education was created the decision was ultimately created by the student movements on the campuses. CUNY was a little bit different at that moment. While the other campuses across the country were kind of focused on the war effort and speaking out against the war, CUNY had that faction as well, but also there was also a more grassroots level action happening around what was going on at the university specifically, right? And it was the Black and Puerto Rican student populations primarily at City College, but also at Brooklyn and also at Queens, led by students who were part of the SEEK program, which was this radical revolutionary pursuit to get students that were ordinarily not in the four-year institutions into the four-year institutions, to make that effort happen across the university and make that effort the entire decision for how admissions were run. So you end up with these kind of convergent student movements in the late 1960s that kind of comes to a climax in 1969 with the shutdown of City College, right? And the students meeting with this kind of larger-than-life president, Buell Gallagher, at City College, who we write about in the book, who kind of takes on the legislative problems that New York City is facing with regards to open admissions, the kind of back and forth, the push and the pull of when that should happen, and meets with the students and brings those two divides together in a way that I've never seen before with anything else. So that's really where the decision comes from.
And again, I know that one of your theme has been this battle for access along with the outside players who come into this and play a part. And I know that you've already mentioned Nelson Rockefeller. Buell Gallagher was another pivotal player. And so you feel that, I know you had said that he was really making real progress in speaking with students and coming to a solution when, again, he was usurped in a certain way. What happened during that time?
Well, Buell Gallagher is an incredibly interesting person. If I could just step back a second. Before coming, he was president of City College for about 16, 17 years. So he's a seasoned administrator. Before that, he's assistant commissioner of higher education back in the federal government. They did not have a Department of Education. It was Health, Education, and Welfare, as I recall. But he was an assistant secretary for higher education. He's also an ordained minister. He's also a president at the age of 29 of Talladega University, which is a historically black college. He's also incredibly active in the NAACP and writes a book that I wouldn't say is a bestseller, but is very well received in terms of racism and segregation in the United States. So he's a very substantive individual, very comfortable working with minority populations. And it is our opinion, I mean, we traced historical record, we did not interview him, he died in the late 1970s, but he's a very substantive individual, very much wanted to negotiate with the students. He had no problem negotiating with the students, but basically he's undermined by the political players in New York City. He's undermined by Mario Procaccino, by Adam Clayton Powell, by Percy Sutton, all of whom are major players in the political realm of New York City and all have opinions as to what should happen at City College. And I believe that undermining really hurt him and hurt his ability to negotiate. And it seems to us that, in looking again at the record, there wasn't enough involvement of the Board of Higher Education at time. He was there, he was the front person, and he was going to do it. And once the police were called in, which he didn't want to do, and he made the decision, but it got to the point at City College where white students were fighting with black students. There was a fight in the auditorium. There was a fire in the auditorium. So he calls in the police. He resigns on a Friday, and it's effective the following Monday. Very interesting story.
You know, I never knew anything about him. He was just the president, the enemy in a certain way. And it's very interesting to read your book. I learned so much.
And so, you know, the last little piece, if you look at the postscript, so to speak, he's a very accomplished person. He writes nothing about the episode. He writes one book afterwards, if I could just
Well, you said he died in the 70s. So
he died in the 70s, but he writes a book, Campus in Crisis.
Oh, he does.
Which, if you look at the cover, there's City College on fire. There's a student with a City CNY and white jacket. There's a firehouse. There's a fire truck.
I don't consider him responsible for the jacket cover.
Yeah, but in any case, but if you read the book, there's hardly anything about City College.
It's interesting. All right, well, let's move on a little bit because we don't have that much time and we have a lot more to cover. So we get open admissions beginning in around 1969 or 1970?
It starts in 1970.
Okay, 1970. So it has a major effect on the university, even for those of us who felt it was the appropriate course of action, but it has a major effect on the university. So let's talk about what happens post-CUNY, what happens to CUNY post-open admissions.
Well, the first thing is the enrollments just go off the charts. The enrollment almost doubles with the advent of open admissions. If you look at 1969, 70 to 1975, the enrollments almost double. The first 2 or 3 years, there are incredible resources put into the university. Money for hiring faculty, which was very important because a lot of the faculty at CUNY, particularly in the senior colleges, could not teach remedial reading
Well, that's
and
another
remedial
point.
writing.
You point out, I think, that 90% of the incoming class needed some kind of remediation or developmental ed.
Yeah, the idea of remediation wasn't new at that point, but the scale of it was enormous. The change from the fall 1969 semester to the fall 1970 semester was enormous in terms of the type of students who were coming in. So remediation becomes central to the success of the students, but it also becomes this very confusing style of pedagogy that wasn't very familiar to the faculty.
Certainly not. And I will have to say this is a quick sidebar that CUNY has made enormous contributions to the research regarding remedial writing and reading and developmental education. I think it began at CUNY because we had that need. One of my first jobs as a college graduate was to work in the CUNY Writing Center and to look firsthand at students who were coming in who needed so much help. So first we have a big insurge in enrollment. And it's an expensive increase in enrollment. But what happens over time here?
Well, and the budget comes with it in 1970, 71, 72. And then around 1973, there's whispers that there's problems in the city of New York with its budget.
Right.
By 1974, it's a more serious problem. By 1975, it is an out-and-out crisis. New York City is running out of money. They're out of the bond market, which means they can no longer borrow to pay against their debt. And they're on the brink of bankruptcy. So every city agency has to go through a major soul searching as to what it's going to be about. Now, CUNY isn't the largest chunk of the New York City budget by any means, but symbolically, the idea of free tuition was very, very important. And a lot of people who wanted to, I would say, force CUNY to change or force the city to change, use CUNY as an example. I mean, we have President Ford commenting about CUNY.
Right, so using an example of you're wasting your money giving free tuition?
It wasn't a question of wasting money, it was the fact that you weren't charging tuition.
So, and you should be.
You should be charging tuition. The idea of a free tuition, even in good fiscal times, was something that was unusual.
Okay.
To say you're in serious financial crises and still going with free tuition policy was not acceptable
so free tuition,
to a lot of people.
So free tuition takes a hit.
Free tuition
and
takes
tuition
a hit.
becomes implemented in what year?
1976.
Can I ask you as a side?
Actually, 75, 76.
Now, of course, the open admissions and the developmental education is expensive. I mean, it's requiring a lot more expenditure. So I know that some people at the time felt very much that, oh, now that they've opened up the university, now they impose tuition, now that all these people from the community are coming in, so they almost felt as if it was against them. But you're saying that there was a genuine fiscal crisis and that there was really no other response.
I mean, it's my opinion that I mean, the city was on the brink of bankruptcy.
And we also see the reputation of the university going down after open admissions.
So I wanted to say a bit about that, and it kind of takes us into the next few periods of time that are mentioned in the book, is that between 1970, when tuition is imposed, those few years, and the grand open admissions experience kind of starts to decline. It's a slow decline, right, over about 30 years, 25, 30 years, where the academic reputation of the city college that you knew in the mid-1960s,
takes a huge hit.
it starts to shift into the negative. And what this does is it takes us into the 1990s. We have Chancellor Ann Reynolds who comes in, and which is kind of the bottom of this period of decline, where Chancellor Reynolds is contending with low academic standards, and it really brings us into the late 90s, where this kind of monumental report comes out about the university, this scathing an institution adrift, authored by Benno Schmidt, who ultimately becomes the chairman of the Board of Trustees, that says, here are the problems with the university. It has a negative reputation nationwide. Here are some recommendations to increase not only fiscal responsibility, but also academic standards.
So let's talk about, we only have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to the rebuilding of the university. So we have this low period. A lot of students are going to SUNY schools because comparatively they're not that much money. They'd rather not go to CUNY. After this Benno Schmidt report, what happens? Matthew Goldstein becomes appointed the chancellor, and what are some of the things that are undertaken that we are even looking at today?
So CUNY enters the 21st period, and this, what we write, is the beginning of a renaissance, right? We start seeing campus physical plants start to rebuild, new campuses opening up, the Graduate School of Journalism, the CUNY Graduate Center gets its new home, right? We start to see a bigger focus on research, but more than that, and there's some conflict around some of these decisions, is that remediation, which has been this kind of problem for CUNY over the last 30 years, is moved from the senior colleges into the community colleges.
And wasn't that the original plan way back when, before open? The original plan was put open admissions in the community college. Okay, so now some of us agree, some don't agree, but it is no longer a part of the fabric of the senior college. Okay, so how do you see the university moving today? What do you see is happening going forward? What do you think is going on now that you want us to know about?
Well, I think it's a very interesting time. I think on the plus side, I think we're all waiting to see how the Excelsior free tuition policy works out. I think that could have enormous ramifications for us and to SUNY, but especially for CUNY. I think we'll see other things in terms of I mean, Chet was alluding to models of reform. I think the ASAP program that is getting a lot of national attention, which is being, I would say, not just experimented with, but is being brought to scale. And some of the community colleges, that is going to, I think we're going to see expansion of that. And Chet just alerted me to something that the Chancellor said a couple of days ago, that he's thinking of about an ASAP program in the senior colleges. That would be very interesting. I think that J.B. Milken, one of his goals is to see more instructional technology. I think we're going to see that in a big way. I think there's this concept of off-the-shelf courses, that, you know, the introduction to sociology course that's being taught all over the university, that there may be courses that faculty could just take off the shelf and use in some kind of...
even discuss the role of faculty in curriculum, pathways, and how faculty might feel about the off-the-course shelf. I'm not sure. That's a whole other thing.
It's a big,
my own ears are picking up.
But I mean, when you're asking about the future, I mean, what we saw with CUNY First on the administrative side, which has been this, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars invested into an administrative centralized system, that actually can provide part of the infrastructure for instructional technology.
To see you get more bang for the buck out of that. Good, okay. Now, we also know that Chancellor Milken is talking about Connected CUNY as his major undertaking right now. So do you see us moving forward in a really positive direction, or as you look at, and we have a new president who clearly is not a big champion of higher education.
I wrote
no secret. I mean,
I mean, I wrote in the afterword, and something that has stayed with me from the book is that we will no longer be an institution adrift. We have a strong faculty. You just mentioned faculty. We have done an enormous amount of work with transfer to make transfer easier from the community to senior colleges. Yes, and but we also, I think, have an enormous opportunity with students with our focus on completion.
One quick question, our time really is up. In the book, Benno Schmidt refers to Matthew Goldstein as the greatest chancellor in the history of the university. Do you agree?
I would have. I mean, that's an interesting question. I would say that I think one, by virtue of his tenure, I think he left more of a mark on the university than the previous chancellors. Bowker was important in the early going in establishing, let's say, the importance of a central office. Kibbe comes in a very, very difficult time, very technical, very managerial, but given the tenor of the 1970s, I think Kibbe made a very important contribution. Joe Murphy, who I knew was, I think, a good chancellor, but did not have the support, I think, of the state of New York in terms of funding. The operating budgets were not that great during his time. Ann Reynolds, I think, had lots of issues in terms of a mayor who was out to see her.
And that was Giuliani.
Mayor Giuliani, who was out to see her gone. And one person I would like to comment about, although he was not, he was an interim chancellor, was Christoph Kimmich, who actually was there for some 2 very tough years. Absolutely. And I think he did some really good work. But then Matt Goldstein's there for 13 years. Yeah. And I think, I have to say, I think that Matt has had more of an impact on this university than any other chancellor. And I've seen them all.
I want to thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chet Jordan. The book is CUNY's First 50 Years, Triumphs and Ordeals of the People's University. I know the next 50 years will be challenging and exciting. I won't see most of them, but I'm very excited to have you both here, and it really is a wonderful book. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with our Ed Bites. Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites. If a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, perhaps it's time to rename the liberal arts. That's the opinion expressed by Brandon Bustede, Executive Director of Education and Workforce Development at Gallup. Claiming that the terms liberal and arts now have negative connotations for some Americans, he posits that a renaming of this course of study could improve the public's opinion on the value of a college degree. Liberal arts skills such as critical thinking, effective communication, collaboration, and problem solving are desired by employers across a range of fields. According to Mr. Bustede, changing the name of the liberal arts might help turn around public support for higher education. Based on studies conducted with rats, the New York Times reports that the best exercise for improving your brain is distance running. Adult male rats that jogged in their cages several miles every day showed increased new brain cells, or neurogenesis. Those rats who only did weight training became stronger, but showed no brain growth. Education Dive reports that suburban private schools are engaging in grade inflation, and that this practice works against urban students. Citing the affluent group's rising GPAs without a corresponding rise in SAT scores, the report indicates that grade inflation may come at the expense of city students, since colleges increasingly look at GPAs for admissions instead of entrance exam scores. Recent polls conducted by Education Next show a significant drop in public support for charter schools, 13 percentage points among Republicans and 11 points among Democrats. Support for these schools also fell among minority groups. Reasons given for the decline focused on increased scrutiny of the charter sector and growing opposition from teachers' unions and civil rights groups. That's it for this edition of EdCast. Till next time, class dismissed.